For those of you who are here, welcome. We'll just give it another minute and then we'll get started. All right, well, I think we'll get started. Hi, everybody. I'm Andrea Fleekop. I am an educator at Temple Bethel in Pensacola, Florida. And I am here kind of representing ARJE, the Limud team, kind of formerly known as Professional Learning. Thank you so much for coming today and joining us. I think with our size group, we have this great opportunity to learn with and from each other. My partner in today's planning is Ellen Lefkowitz. She is off celebrating a big birthday, so she is not with us here today, but we are happy for her and thank her for organizing some of the stuff to get ready for today. So today's webinar is strengthening the connection between early childhood and youth education. We hope that today is one in a long line of future joint programs that we can do together between our two organizations. We have so many things in common that it would be great to take the opportunity to learn with and from each other as time goes on. Let's see. So the way we set it up today is we invited two pair of panelists to kind of help lead our discussion and share their wisdom. So a brief introduction. We've got a pair from Temple Sinai in Atlanta, Jema and Marissa. So Jema is the Director of Early Childhood at Temple Sinai. She's had 10 years of experience in early childhood. She's a Georgia certified teacher and a longtime member of Ece-Rj. She and her husband have two daughters who have grown up with the congregation. So welcome. I'm just gonna turn my page there. Okay, and we welcome her partner, Marissa. Marissa is the Senior Director of Learning and Engagement at Temple Sinai. She's been in this role since 2014, and she really oversees all the education programs at the Temple. She's also the current president of ARJE, which is a big role. And she has a master's in Jewish education from UJ, now known as American Jewish University. And she has 3 sons who also go to the congregation. So moving over to Central Time, we have a pair from Chicago. We've got Susie Wexler and Missy Bell. Susie's the director of the Early Childhood Program and has been doing it for a long time. She has a bachelor's in psychology, a master's in social work, and a master's in Jewish educational leadership from HUC. She's been actively involved. She's been asked to speak on a whole host of topics, and she's delighted to be here with her partner. And it's nice to see you since we did a webinar together a little while back. Missy is the Director of Education at the congregation. She has a master's in Jewish education and in Jewish nonprofit management from HUC. Her area of expertise include curriculum development and youth engagement. She participates in Chicago's Federation Initiative to Transform Hebrew Learning. And she's the Vice President of Finance for ARJE and a board member of the Reform Pension Board. And she's also delighted to be here with her partner. So those are our two pairs. I'm thrilled to welcome all of you. And I know they have a lot of wisdom to share with us. So I will stop talking and I will kind of turn it over to them. kind of our opening question really is if you could share a bit about your professional role and your working relationship. So whoever wants to jump in first, please do so.
We can start. Zoom manners. We're all having Zoom manners. No, the finger on the nose works. That works for Zoom too. So I'm the director of education at BJBE. So I oversee the religious school and our youth engagement programs, and also immersive experiences for our families, like our Israel trips. And I work with Susie.
I am the early childhood director, and I think one of the things that actually is unique is that when it comes to family experiences, Missy and I do very much partner on those moments. So whether it's the family Shabbat, a family retreat, where education becomes engagement, we try and serve as a team approaching it rather than dividing it up by a child's chronological being. We look at sort of the whole family system being our group.
And as far as our working relationship, our offices are next to each other, which we love. We're in and out of each other's offices all day long. We meet weekly together, the two of us. We also have a weekly meeting with what we call the education team, which includes Susie's assistant director and the education operations coordinator and the youth director, to really all keep collaborating and working together.
I think that's us.
So we're Jema and I are at Temple Sinai in Atlanta. We have been in an intentional process over the last 6 years, I would say, of really going through a strategic plan for our early childhood program and integrating our preschool into our overall synagogue and education life. So I don't believe there's anything within education that we don't overlap and talk through and partner on, and really just kind of working on culture shifts that we kind of work. So day to day, we are problem solving regularly. We lately have a 7:45 phone call after each of us do our own carpool drop-offs on COVID updates, is our latest trend. But Jema and I work hand in hand when it comes to budget, when it comes to family engagement, and problem solving just throughout. And today is actually Jema's day off, because actually Jema works on Sundays to help bridge early childhood into our Sunday experience. So she takes off on Mondays. So I was able to convince her to join me by being my Valentine today, because we actually don't shy away from Valentine's Day at Temple Sinai, but we embrace it. But that's why we're not in the same office.
That's right. And I would never deny being Marissa's Valentine. I was happy to be here with her. And the only thing I will add is that it was a journey to get us to where we are today. It did not start off like this when both of us assumed these roles. Mm-hmm. Marissa started in this role in 2014, and the engagement structure or the education structure was very different than it is now. So we definitely have been on this journey together. It was an intentional process of making sure that we could work together and kind of join the early childhood and preschool into the overall vision of education at Temple Sinai.
Yeah, I would just add with that, that's actually, we forget that it's been, before both of us got in these positions, we very much had a typical preschool downstairs, the rest of the world of Temple Sinai upstairs. And it's only because the right people were in the right positions, both on the lay side and the staff side, that we've been able to make such strides. and including, redesigning our entire education space and around shared space as opposed to feeling like we're invading space. So that definitely would not have happened if we hadn't gone through that process.
Great. So to kind of follow up on that, can you talk a bit about like some of those steps that were involved, and also kind of some of the background in terms of how you became the partners that you are today?
I guess, do you want to go first, Missy? You want us?
Sure. Why don't you go first and you can talk,
Fine.
because you just referred to your
Fine.
but then we also have been through a similar process, so we can share after you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So look, on paper, we have a full team of educators. So on paper, I'm technically JAMA's supervisor. In reality, we are real partners, and JAMA's our senior longest educator on team with me. So she really helps all of our educators and all of in all of our ages. But I would say informally is like my go-to thought partner person to vent to. And also just, we like to share a glass of wine regularly, right? And she's fun to do that with. But I would say that our process started as a real strategic plan of looking at what happened within our synagogue, what our families needed, looking at the data, environmental scans, and realizing that only at that time we had a half-day preschool. And it was very much for the, one working parent, one stay-at-home parent kind of group. And we realized that we only had 50% of our congregation who had children 0 to 5 were actually attending our preschool. And historically, our preschool was the first Jewish preschool in Atlanta, because all the Jewish families were going to churches, because that's all that existed. So the history is really there. So throughout that process was when we decided, with a real partnership with lay leaders and parents and teachers and everybody, our clergy, to expand our preschool and both become accredited in terms of striving towards excellence, but also change our days and our hours to become licensed to be able to offer full day options, starting with infants. So that required in order to do so, a full renovation that was needed, that the congregation went through in a capital change. And so that's like over the last 6 years, all of these things have happened to where we were able to open our new building in August of 2019, become licensed in October or November 2019, open our first infant room in January of 20. And then March of 20, we all know what happened. So that's kind of been where we're at. And now we actually are in a place, believe it or not, where we call our religious school NOAR registration last year was way down, where preschool has been up and continues to grow. We now have waiting lists for next fall, and we've grown faster than we expected in a good way. So we just kind of have been, so our ongoing process is to kind of continue that roadmap. The other piece that this process did, which is kind of the biggest thing that shifted our working relationship, is that we no longer look at the preschool as a deficit making group of our synagogue, that they're having a deficit. They're not siloed out of our budget. So now the preschool is part of the overall education budget, which lifelong learning. And so I technically oversee that budget. And now the synagogue and the board says, this is how much we are willing to invest in Jewish education. And some years, preschool's helping that, and some years preschool's not. It really just depends. But that's where all of adult learning, teen learning, youth learning, all of those engagement groups is all under one 700s, if you will, in our synagogue budget, which is about a third of the budget. And so our board and our finance committee are really intentional about changing that narrative as well. So what else do we do, Jema?
No, I think that was a good summary, a good recap. I think, the beginning of this process, I came in, I was perfectly happy with our half-day preschool. In my mind, it was running as it should be. I wasn't really, I didn't jump in wanting this change. And, history for me, I was a preschool parent before that, a teacher before that. So I loved Temple Sinai Preschool as it was. But when we went through this strategic plan, the data showed that we were ready for this change. And so that was kind of when our journey and partnership together started, that if we were going to do it, we definitely had to do it together and as partners. And that was with our lay leaders as well. It would not have been something that either of us would have been able to make happen on our own. And the budget piece is huge. We run into a lot. I've had a conversation that I did with Jack Feldman, our executive director, for some groups before too, because it's a different type of model for budgeting, that preschool is not so separated out and siloed out. So it really is kind of a different model than a lot of congregations use, but it's helpful that we budget together and go through this process together. And again, some years preschool, our registration right now keeps climbing, which is crazy that it's happening, during a pandemic. We feel fortunate in that regard. But that we're looking at the overall budget, and that preschool is not like the one who's off to the side, losing money, and we just have to fix this preschool problem. It's an overall education number that we're looking at, has been a huge change for us.
So you may have seen us laughing a little on and off, because so much of what Marissa and Jema were saying echoes for us. So Susie started at BJBE in 2014. I came along 3 years later in 2017. And on paper, I am also Susie's supervisor, but the reality is I could not ask for a better thought partner and creative partner. And on my rough days, she lifts me up. I hope I do the same for her on her rough days. And the history kind of before us and as we were getting started is things were also very, very separate here. That, early childhood was here, religious school was there. And, Tot Shabbat was for the young families with kids in the Chava Center in our preschool. And Matzah Ball Shabbat was the family service for kids in elementary school and up. And just, it was all very separate. And we've really partnered together on family engagement, as Susie was talking about before, to really make it, we are all one community. We are all part of the BJBE community. Our family Shabbat has really become for families of all ages, starting from 0 all the way up. We partner together on our family retreat, which was just not just a week ago, at Badas Rui in Wisconsin. And we have, families of all ages, early childhood and elementary, participating. And we've really worked together, and it's been, it was a huge priority of Susie's before I started, that I was excited about and got on board with, to really help our early childhood families see that this is their community. They're not just part of the preschool, but they're part of our larger congregational community. And the norm in our area was for a lot of kids to start religious school and Hebrew school in 3rd grade, because that's when Hebrew learning begins. So a lot of families would wait until 3rd grade. We had a kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade religious school, but the classes were small, and a lot of them didn't necessarily come from the preschool, but just came from the community. And where we've really focused so much of our energy on time is having these families see themselves as part of the BJBE community. And you don't go away when you graduate from the Chava Center, but you're still here. And this year we have almost 50 kids in kindergarten, which is more than double than we've ever had in the 5 years that I've been here. And so much of it has come from Susie's investment in these families to see themselves as part of BJBE and not just part of our preschool.
And I think one of the biggest things that we find consistently is families don't fit into that small box of early childhood or family age. That very often a family has multiple offspring that fit into a number of these categories. And so when we were offering programming that would be early childhood at this time period and grade school at this time period, it meant families didn't know which one was appropriate for them, and they chose to come to none. And that was exactly the opposite of what we wanted to see happen. Rather, we found ways to create meaningful programs that are adaptive to all age levels, and then become more of an inclusion opportunity as well. Because when we are able to have the same experience that allows for our youngest learner all the way up to their grandparent being able to come together as a community, we've really opened our programming doors to everybody, and people don't have to figure out which niche are they going to fall into and leave the rest of their family behind. But the other thing that it's done also is it's allowed us to collaborate on supporting families. And that's been an enormous piece where whether it's a family coming to Missy and me being able to say, you know, hey, don't put those two kids together in Sunday school. That's not a good plan. Or this child's going to need extra support, but their family is still working on seeing it. Or yeah, that call with that mom, I know exactly what that's like. Let's come into my office with a glass of wine and talk about that, because we can see relationships in a way that nobody else really has that experience. And so much of the work of being a Jewish educator is feeling like you're the only one in the building doing what you do. Having somebody else in the building as your partner is an enormous relief and joy.
And at the same time, we still, I don't think we're quite where we'd like to be with budget and with lay leadership and kind of those bigger pieces that I think Marissa and Jema have achieved, but that we're certainly working together to get to.
So just kind of springboarding off of that, can you just share, I guess, kind of what percentage of preschool families are members? How hard do you push for that? How many are not Jewish, and how does that, what are the expectations there in terms of involvement in the congregation, if any? Could you share a little bit about that?
So our process, when we started our strategic planning process, the first question we asked our committee was, what was the purpose of our preschool? And we clarified that the purpose of the preschool was not about membership, and it was not about making money. That the purpose of the preschool was to engage families with young children. That was it. So we continue that. There's not an expectation from our board that we have to bring in members. We know that the investment in the preschool brings in members later on, but it's not a requirement. Our preschool is about 30-35% non-members or community members, we call them. But we really try to integrate them as regular members with everything when they have life cycle events or new babies or all of those things, because we really know that if we invest in them over those 4 or 5 years, they all, remain part of the community.
Right. So I was going to add, we intentionally switched our language. You heard Marissa say that we have their community members. So we tried to do away with member, non-member. We didn't want, those who had not yet joined Temple Sinai, or if they weren't going to feel any less than or different. I'm actually not so good at knowing who's a member or a non-member. Like, to me, they're preschool or early childhood families that come to Temple Sinai. And if they come to Tot Shabbat or Family Shabbat or any type of programming, they're welcome regardless of what, kind of their status says in Shul Cloud. I think the board sometimes asks for that data. It's hard to track, as all of you know, of, why someone joins, did they join specifically for the preschool? Did they stay because they already loved the preschool? So those lines are a little bit blurred. But, we want everybody who wants to be able to come to Temple Sinai to feel welcome. So that's kind of how we approach that.
And for the record, we also have a non-member rate to attend NOAR, which is our what we call religious school, as a way of bringing in community members. So we do offer that to families for 1 year, that they can join NOAR for 1 year at an additional cost without being a member. So this is something that we've kind of continued on, and really just that cultural shift that we made in the preschool has changed also our thinking across the board around just bringing people into. It's hard to turn away a Jewish education if it's around membership.
Yeah. So our journey with member non-partner, we're in a little state of a flux institutionally, where in the time I've been part of early childhood, we've evolved from, if your child is in the early childhood center, you're already considered a member of the congregation, to a transition as membership to being more of a shared sacred partnership, choose your structure. And the first year, to be perfectly honest, they forgot that they had to make a plan for the early childhood families. So we just sort of rode that wave for a year. So, we see it as, I see it as that early childhood is our opportunity to show you the privileges and the benefits of being part of a congregational community. So focusing less on the membership component and more on what being a congregant actually means, and really allowing families to see the relationship of the relationships made during those early childhood years, which we know are very deep and impactful relationships for the children and their families, that rather than seeing them as ending when you go to kindergarten, seeing them as seeds that are germinating to become your Sunday school cohort, your B'nai Mitzvah cohort, your empty nester cohort, that these will be relationships that will be with you on the journey of life and not just the early childhood journey. So we see it more as our opportunity to educate on what congregational membership, congregational involvement brings to your family, and less what are you contributing to us?
Yeah. I mean, the way I put together the kindergarten classes this year, we're basically taking last year's 2 4s classes and making those into the 2 kindergarten classes. And then of course, adding a bunch of other kids who just joined this year. And yeah, it's really about building those relationships, maintaining those relationships, making sure my relationships with those kids and families don't start when the kids are in kindergarten, but start well before. But we really, in the last, I don't have hard data, but really in the last 5 years, we've gone from a place where, a very small percentage of them were staying at BJBE or waited until 3rd grade, to a place where the majority of them are coming straight into kindergarten. And even those who don't go straight into kindergarten are picking up here in 1st, 2nd, or 3rd grade. They really have come to see BJBE as their congregation.
Can I add a little something to that too? It just reminded me, you're talking about, the bridge between the early childhood program and kindergarten. And we had always, like Marissa would call me and ask the question, should these pre-K kids be together in their kindergarten classes? And it kind of led us to this process of how do we both become more involved on both sides. So Marissa now leads Havdalah with our pre-K students on Monday mornings, which allows her to get to know our preschool students and the teachers and just kind of build that relationship with some of those preschool families. And then I also, I don't know whether it's a good or a bad idea, but we went with it. So I started working and being there for NOAR programming on Sundays. And it was with the thought that I knew these families, most of them coming in, knew the families, could call them out by name, like just help transition and bridge that between ECE and NOAR. And I've really enjoyed it. And one thing that I did I wanted to agree to that. I wanted to be there on Sunday, but also trying to like protect my work-life balance. I take Mondays off now, which is why I'm at home today, which, I can only do because of the support staff and the support system that we have at Temple Sinai, and things are in place. Now, of course, crazy things happen on Mondays. And, if it's a really bad COVID day, I go in. If there's a new child, that's starting and I want to be there for that family, I'll go in on a Monday, but knowing that, I have the flexibility to then find another time to take for myself. But it's really been great, I think, for both sides of the programming to help further integrate us into one.
It's been a huge piece. The other side that now we're starting to look at is our director, our educator, is how can she be more involved in the preschool, maybe helping with curriculum or like technology or doing things with pre-K as well to kind of bridge that. And that was like an organic process. It wasn't a requirement, right? It happened naturally when thinking about just how do we build relationships with the families? And, so it's now starting to force all of us to think like this, even around our madrachim and our teens, and how do we use them in different ways in all ages, or just kind of knowing what's around. And that's the team approach that I think, I wouldn't say we should have COVID for this outcome, but one of the COVID keepers is that educators are really forced to collaborate much more, and we understand what each other are going through, and we've had to problem solve together in so many ways and use each other throughout that. So that's just been something that we've been really intentional about, making this sustainable for us as educators without us all quitting. That's just the reality. So that is also
the COVID piece of it actually has been an enormous piece of collaboration as educators, because there's often this vision of the institution being a congregational setting. And we have a very strong and vocal sense of, well, it's also a school, and we have to be really clear on what protocols are going to be school-based and how the whole building has to be sensitive to, it is a school all the time and a congregation sometimes. And so having this partnership, in some ways, COVID has really required that the rest of the institution look at, how does school happen within the institution? And what space, how do we use spaces and things like that, in a way that I think pre-COVID, it was very easy for the non-school pieces of our community to just sort of stay in their silo and not have to be in tune to what was happening in the other areas.
There was a question that came up in the chat I just wanted to address. It was about family engagement and kind of creating programs that are appropriate for little children and older children. And how do you create a program that's going to be successful for a wide age range?
Yeah, so there's no program that's going to be perfect for every age, but really it's about thinking about there's different aspects that will, so that there's at least something that will appeal to each age. So I think I saw like something about a 2-year-old and a 12-year-old. So, we make sure families know it's okay for your kid to be dancing in the aisle during the service, or for you to be standing in the back with your stroller or your kid who needs holding, or whatever you need to do, but that it's just a welcoming space for everyone. And it might be that the elementary age kids are singing in the junior choir. It might be that the story that the rabbi is telling is more directed to a little bit younger kids, but really making sure that through these combinations of pieces, there is something that's going to appeal to everyone and that's going to feel appropriate for all ages. And we also have pre-activities, that there's a range of things that'll appeal to the youngest and the oldest. And sometimes it's that the older kids are helping out. We love having tweens and teens as madrichim and assistant madrichim, helping run the things for the little kids. We even have second and third and fourth graders who love helping out with the 2- and 3-year-olds. And so that's something that really we take advantage of too.
And thinking about the timing of programming, I think one of the things that is such an important lens that the education team brings to the whole institution is really looking at the quality of the program can only be enhanced by having it at the right time for the community. And when programming is done around adult schedules and not thinking about the flow of children's lives and we each come to this from different communities. We happen to live in a community where, it's a suburban world and there are certain windows that families are not going to prioritize congregational experiences. So looking at when do we have our Sukkot celebration for families and really being very intentional about Sunday early afternoon, while it might seem like such a great time, that's soccer season around here in the autumn. And so if you ask families to choose between their league soccer and a Jewish holiday celebration, we're not going to like the choice they make. So let's plan it a time where families of all ages can come. Let's not have programming in the middle of nap time, because that's going to encourage families with a variety of ages to come. So I think that's another place where there's a lens that early childhood in collaboration with education can really shed light on how to maximize the success of a program for the whole family. And the final thought with that is, I think it's really valuable that we advocate. We live in a society where age stratification has become so restrictive, to the point where enrichment classes, you have old twos and young twos. You'll have, 10 or 10 and a half year old soccer, and children don't get a chance necessarily to be around children of another age group. And yet we know there is so much value in seeing, in little ones, seeing how older kids behave at a service, because then they have a model. And for older children to be able to be the model and to have that fluidity of experience. And really, we're at a point where congregational life is one of the few times that are mixed age experiences for families, where it really can be the whole, many generations, from the youngest in, not walking, all the way through grandparents and great grandparents. And when you think about that, there are so few ways and spaces that they all can be together, that we should really elevate congregational life as that amazing opportunity, as the place where your whole family belongs at once.
It's like at our family retreat last weekend, over the course of the entire weekend, we had 1 hour-and-a-half program that we separated by age. And it was great, but that was it. Everything else was completely together, mixed ages, from, kids age 2 to 12, their parents, and it just works and they enjoy being together.
Great. It sounds like y'all are very blessed to have each other. Can you kind of share, has there been any any advice for how to manage if, your partner's not exactly on board yet, or if the board is not quite yet, or the clergy?
Yeah. My biggest advice is start with the relationship. I truly think part of why our relationship is so good is because my first year, we started having a glass of wine together before every single matzo ball Shabbat. And it was a nice way to kind of end the week and have a chance to sit and chat and relax and get to know each other. And I think, it's important to build that relationship and build that level of trust and find room to be vulnerable around each other. That really creates the basis for a partnership that works.
And I would say, having been in this, because I had a partner before Missy and it was not the same kind of partnership, but there were things that we could begin to work together around. We share space, and that's an enormous piece of how can we create shared community around shared space, because the Sunday school program takes place in the early childhood classrooms, and after school used to take place, but now everything's a little more complicated. But so when we can try to make each other's lives easier, the resentment piece erodes. Also with supplies, nobody in congregational life is against any idea that will save money. I've yet to meet any leader who's like, no, we do not want money saved. Never, do not try something that will save us money. So, but when we can be very intentional about using supplies, coming up with programmatics that like, oh, if you're going to be doing Chanukiot and let's buy in bulk and use things and share things and not have everybody doing their own thing. It creates a common language across age groups. And then clergy found it easier to connect with it because it was already happening with everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. It's about the right people and the right time. But I will say that so much of what we've done is actual culture change, and it didn't happen overnight. We were really, our preschool teachers were very cautious about me for at least 2 or 3 years. I was this, person who came in, and then all of a sudden I was, overseeing preschool after Jameis predecessor left, and it wasn't a great experience, right? I still have PTSD from it, for the record, but the truth is now I've had to earn their trust. And it's partly because Jama and I have this relationship and trust, and Jama had to learn that too. She wasn't as on board at first. And it's not that she was pushed in any way. It was just kind of going through the process. And so the more that you can find one person to think about culture change and bring into the conversation, the better. I was just talking to a rabbi colleague who's about to hire a new educator, and he was sharing with me how their board kind of pushed her out, or like just didn't value her. And I was saying that it's his job as her supervisor, right? As the rabbi in charge of education, he can actually amplify and advocate for education, even if no educators are at the table, right? And so from the board level, so it's talking to your clergy partners, it's talking to your executive directors about how do we kind of amplify the great things happening around the board level, and also just organically coming into the preschool. We're still not there. I mean, I will say very naturally, our staff really wants to always include our preschool teachers now, which has been great. And so like if we're doing a staff lunch, we always include our preschool staff. But there still isn't that relationship of, it doesn't take long for you to get out of your office and walk down to the preschool just to see what's happening or see. And you know what? We've just got a new finance person in our office. And she is the first person who organically every morning walks, and we have a long campus, walks down to the preschool, says good morning to the staff, and has a conversation, and she sees what's happening. She's the first person on our staff who has ever done that. And it's just because she likes to get up. She wants to come and see what's happening. She's friendly. She leaves notes for people. And it's so funny that like everyone's like, what can we do intentionally about, being close in a relationship? And some of it is just organic niceness, right? Of just getting to know one another. And so part of that just takes time, and relationships don't happen overnight, and culture change doesn't happen overnight.
I agree with all of that said. I will also say, this has a lot to do with just our relationship, which both partner groups have talked about. And you might be in a different kind of staff structure. You might not have that partner. Your partner might not be nice. But I think just in the invitation should go out regardless. So if you have a different type of relationship, invite them to come to the preschool for a couple of days and just see what's happening. I think sometimes there's a lack of understanding of what the preschool day looks like, of what you're doing all day. We don't generally, as preschool directors, like sit at our desk and stay there stationary and attend meetings all day. Our day looks very different. And then the Sunday program, the youth program, teen program is the same thing. Invite the other person to come just so that you can get an understanding. And I think a big part of us, visioning through our shared space concept was me being able to be there on Sundays and see what's happening. Because we both know, sharing space is hard, and I think preschools naturally feel like, well, we're there all week, all day. We use the space more. You only use it for 2 hours on Sunday. That's a real thing everywhere. But like, how can we work through that? Because those 2 hours are important. So I want you to have the right space that works for you, but it also has to work for us because we're in the space a lot. But, not everybody's relationship is going to be what mine and Marissa's is, or Missy and Susie's. But I think just extending the invitation to come down to the preschool, that you are welcome, I think could go a long way in just starting that culture shift.
Great. I'm cognizant of time, and I wanted to kind of open the floor to anyone that has specific questions. I saw in the chat the topic of PJ Library came up, and how is that something that is shared between the educational programs?
Yeah, anything involving families is kind of involving across the board. It's not really like one person or the other. I think we really think about the whole family in that way. For us, we have a bunch of PJ Library connectors in the community, some who are members, and one who actually teaches our Know Our Junior, which is our Sunday pre-K program. So that's a natural kind of overlap with JAMA now being on Sundays to kind of continue with that. So PJ Library is, a great partnership, and really anything we're thinking about with families is no longer just school age families or just early childhood families.
I'm going to call on Amy.
And with that same idea, I think one of the questions becomes like, how do you start? Like, it's great when you have new people come into the position, and then it's sort of this, like, how fun to have somebody I like to work with. Like, that makes it so much easier. But what happens if you're in, like, you're nothing systemically is changing? And so how can we begin to plant the seeds to create, small, and, I think some of the big ones are like the Purim congregational extravaganza, to whatever degree, to really, that was, I think, one of the places where we really began partnering on, hey, why don't we make some of it really intentionally thoughtful for our youngest learners, who also might, and the things we would bring to the table that would be a little less sensory, a little less overwhelming for our youngest learners, also became very strong invitations for our differentiated learners of all ages. And so some of it is our partnership around what we saw as demographic levels, also created windows to let the rest of the congregation see families as scaffolded experiences across the board. Purim was one. You really start breaking down all the big holidays where we're trying to say, let's create windows for families and windows for congregants of all ages. When we're thoughtful about flow, our older congregants or congregants who have mobility issues also feel more comfortable in the space. So, I just think sometimes we put a flag in the sand around any one holiday and make that comfortable, and then extend to the next and extend to the next and extend to the next. Because I think, I can imagine it would be really hard if you didn't have a partner and you're just starting from, like, today I'm going to make it friendly. Like that's harder than it just sounds to be. But I do think that I also would say parents, to find that handful of parents who have children of multiple ages, it's rare in a family with many children that they don't have children that hit multiple demographics. And so then what do? You want to take your youngest child to Tot Shabbat, but what are you going to do with your 8-year-old? And if we don't look at families as being this span, we're really missing the whole purpose of congregational experiences to our value structure.
Great. Okay, Amy, I wanted to go back to you.
So I'd love to hear from Missy and Gina and Missy and Susie. We have a new rabbi educator who is going to be joining our congregation. And so it's a really great opportunity for me, and she's a rabbi. So there's already that little bit of hierarchical piece that is the reality of congregational life, or at least in Temple Sinai and Summit. And if you could give me 2 tips, any of you, on what to do from the start so that I set this tone of being collaborative and share my excitement of wanting to see what we can bring, I would be so grateful.
So the first tip is rabbis are people, and I would break down any hierarchy you have in your head. Like that would be my first tip in full. Rabbi Stacy Rigler is shaking her head. I say that really honestly, because it's not about actually if you're a rabbi, if you're a cantor, if you're clergy versus not, because we all do pastoral, we all do education, we all do family engagement. So I do think that, again, some communities have a much more kavod harav, like putting clergy on a different pedestal. But I think just in your mind, in order to build a relationship, kind of removing that. And I would say it's really about, I think, collaborating on something as opposed to embracing the narrative of silos. So we still have a culture here where anything involving kids, oh, go see Jama and Marissa. And that just drives me crazy, right? We don't all need to be, it's not like outsourcing it to us. Why don't we all do it collectively? So think about the High Holy Day family experience that you guys can work on together as what could we do collaboratively to do it that way, as opposed to, and just being intentional around that. I don't know. That's just like the first thing that pops out of my mind.
I also think whatever talents somebody is going to bring to a new job, which is why they were hired for that job, the thing that the person entrenched has is the relationships with the system, and where we can create partnership around that. Like, I'd love to introduce you to people. I'd love that some key, these are some of the families that I have found to be great seed planters when I want to germinate something new. And they've come up through our program, so they're really entrenched in the culture of our institution. Can I introduce you? Can we have coffee together? Those kinds of moments create the parity of experience in a way that is partnering rather than hierarchical. And in terms of the whole silo thing, one of the lines, Missy's going to be like, you can kick me, but I say it all the time whenever people say something about stay in your lane or anything like that, because my answer is always, it's very hard to swim in your lane when you work in a whirlpool, because there are no lanes in congregational life. And so the idea that we're going to stay in a lane, what lane would that be? The space I use is used by all different things. The families I serve are all different folk. There is nothing that is so segmented in a congregation. So I think the more we can be educators on what engagement really means, I think the more we're going to benefit everybody in seeing through this new lens.
And I would also say, just in addition to echoing what Marissa said about, don't worry about them being a rabbi. It's just a title. It's not, they're people too. But also ask for regular meetings, like whether it can be weekly, whether it can be bi-weekly. Communication is so important. Make her your thought partner. And I think that will help too.
And I would like to add, never underestimate the power of a glass of wine together. Both of us have said that's how, part of our relationship comes from that. And I think if you establish that, if they don't drink, find something else. But, if you do that right off the bat, instead of having to wait 6 months and then there's a problem and then you want to talk about it, like you're in control of how this relationship starts. You've been there. So they're starting new. They don't know the culture yet. So it can be whatever kind of culture you want it to be. And also, Amy, you have a PhD, right? So never think of they're the rabbi, because you are a very smart woman.
Thank you. Apparently I fooled you. Yes, and I have a wonderful working relationship with our senior rabbi. This is a new position. It is going to be an associate rabbi who is also director of congregational learning. So we're all going to be trying to figure out. And I ask forgiveness if I have offended anybody by mentioning the rabbi component, because it's not that at all. It's new. And as we piece it together, I am trying to be very intentional on the first steps that I take in welcoming her to our program, and how do I share the excitement of what can be going forward, not what was going past.
Great. So I'm very cognizant of time, but I see Stacy has her hand raised. So
I just wanted to add, and I know I speak for Trisha and Ece-Rj, that I also would love to use the language of best practices in the field are these collaborations. And I know that's something that Trisha and I feel passionate about. We're just getting to know each other as the professionals. But any way that the ARJE office can be an advocate for this type of collaboration, it's what we believe wholeheartedly. And I'd love to think that's what the preschool directors I worked with when I was a practitioner would say about me personally.
great. Well, I'm sure that if any of our participants have additional questions, our panelists would be happy to talk to you at a later point. But I just wanted to thank you all so much for participating. And I hope this is the start of a shared, continued learning opportunity. So thank you all very much.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Susie, can we make this into shared swag with something about the very hard to